You should have like a little, snaps a thing. And Dan Malloy, happy to be here. Ben Barnes, Secretary of OPM, and Mike Lawler, who is at OPM and heads our criminal justice portion of OPM, is with me as well. He's prepared to talk about Second Chance, as I am. Ben has a general background on the budget, and I guess I'll begin by simply saying, I know from reading the paper that you are aware of my address and what I'm trying to do budgetarily. I think the important messages of the speech, and it was probably the most worked on speech that I've ever delivered, is to have the state accept a couple of basic things. Number one, to do away with this concept of same services budget, because it basically puts spending on autopilot, and quite frankly puts us in a perpetual state of deficit, because the premise is based on the idea that we're going to have double-digit income growth, and that's not going to happen. So we should stop using that model to try to calculate how we're going to spend our money in years down the road. Number two, and very much directed and related to that, is the fact that in a post-Great Recession world, we are more like the world in a post-Great Depression as opposed to a normal recession that we experience from time to time in the post-Second World War period of time, which is to say that we are in a slow growth mode. That's not Connecticut's issue, it's just about every state's issue, and even the carbon states now understand what's going on in a very much changed world with respect to their income as well. And taking those two things into consideration and projecting relatively slow growth for the foreseeable future, we need to realign the way we spend money. We need to concentrate on core services. We need to protect those core services, which means everything else needs to receive a higher degree of scrutiny. And quite frankly, everything else in the biennium budget, not everything, but many things need some budgetary adjustment, which we have made by sending the legislature a budget that holds certain expenses steady, and then otherwise calls for a relatively small decrease in expenditures in the next fiscal year. And then obviously, I believe what we're doing now will have to continue in the foreseeable future in the slow growth economy. So that's what I think Ben and I are here to discuss. One of the major components of last year's agenda and this year's agenda is Second Chance Society, which I'm very much committed to building out here in Connecticut. Had great success in the legislature last year. I want to continue that success of a couple of major things, and that is to extend juvenile status to a higher age group, extend youthful offender status to another age group, and to have major bail reform, particularly for nonviolent offenders on low bail. We are currently housing about 500 of them at any given moment, and basically we're keeping people in jail because they're poor, at a cost of about $120 a night on bail that could be set or could be made for as little as $250 to $2,000 in most cases, and that's that 500 to 550, even up to 600 people at any given time in our corrections system, mostly pre-trial on bail less than $20,000, and the cash alternative is substantially lower than that. So those are the things that I'm happy to talk about, or anything else that's on your agenda. And happy to be here, and very much appreciative of your coverage of the news.
Can I ask you, Governor, on the Second Chance Society measure? You travel around the state a lot. You talk to a lot of folks. What's been the gut reaction that people have had towards this opportunity for a new kind of justice in Connecticut?
I think it's a fair question. I think everyone thinks it makes sense. I mean, overwhelmingly, people think it makes sense. We need to bring in to alignment our concepts of criminal justice with brain development. We know a lot more about maturation or maturity than we did years ago. Most of the studies now indicate that that process is completed at the age of 25, not at the age of 15 or 16 or 17 or 18. To permanently scar someone and make them unemployable, unhousable, and not even qualify for a student loan doesn't make a whole lot of sense if we can avoid it, which is a way of saying that I think most people accept that a period of incarceration is extremely damaging. We know that a period of incarceration ranging from 8 to 14 days, that little time can and will substantially damage a person and their prospects, disconnect them from their community and their support network, and leads to additional negative behaviors. Now, one of the great things about Connecticut and where we are at the moment is we have the lowest crime rate we've had in 48 years. We're making progress on recidivism. We have the lowest youthful incarcerated numbers in probably better than a generation, maybe ever, quite frankly, at least as a percentage of total incarcerated population. So these are the right times to be pressing forward on this, and I think that's very much tied in with bail reform, because having people remain in jail at $120 a night pre-trial on very low bail is in essence incarcerating them for poverty, and we need to change that. And if we change it, by the way, not only do we save people from that period of incarceration, but we also save a lot of money for the state in a period of time where we have the lowest crime rate we've had in 48 years.
Can you talk a little more about the what changes you want to make with youthful?
Yeah, I want to extend youthful offender status to additional years. So rather than cutting it off where we currently cut it off at 18, take it up for additional years in alignment with what we know about maturity and full brain development.
How many years are we talking about?
We would take it up to year 21.
Yeah, so we're talking about youthful offender status, which is not juvenile court jurisdiction. YO status already exists. It's used for 16 and 17-year-olds right now. So the governor's proposed raising that up to 21 starting this October. And so when you were arrested, you'd come into court in YO status, which we are treated differently. And there's exclusions in the statute, the most serious crimes, people who've already got felony conviction, there's a bunch of exclusions, but by and large.
The same system that currently extends to people up to the age 18 would extend at age 21. And let me give you my best argument for that. We don't let people buy liquor under the age of 21. I mean, as a society, we've accepted that judgment isn't at its best at 18 or 19. And it's not my best argument. There's many other arguments, but it's the common sense one. In fact, I understand someone's proposing that we not sell tobacco to people younger than the age of 21 in the state of Connecticut as opposed to 18. I haven't made that proposal, but I read about it a couple of weeks ago. Somebody was going to come forward with that. We accept in many different ways that people are not sufficiently mature to do and make certain decisions, and all I'm saying is why have somebody end up with a criminal record or a period of incarceration or damage them in some other way if it's not necessary. And it has, then it has lifelong costs. It's not just a mistake. It's really derogatory.
What kind of reaction are you encountering?
Again, I think that we have sparked a national discussion. We have sparked a discussion within our own state, and so far we haven't seen editorial or public outcry. In fact, we've seen just the opposite. We've seen general support. I understand it's got to go through a process and it has to be explained and everyone has to understand what we're trying to do, but what I'm trying to do is save lives.
And I would point out save money. I mean,
And
we love it
Yeah.
because this helps us meet some of our tough targets.
Well, do we have changing attitudes generally about crime in Connecticut? Because we saw what happened in the wake of Cheshire. We saw this long-term U.S. war on drugs be a failure. And we saw people expressing their let's get tough on crime.
But it didn't
you know,
work. I mean, we quadrupled our prison population in a relatively short period of time, which meant we were, permanently damaging a lot of people for a long period of time, and those numbers went up. Now, as we're lessening that population, we're actually seeing crime and recidivism decline. I mean, let's get these two things together, and the idea that we want to leave someone with a permanent scar that makes them unemployable on a long-term basis or less employable just doesn't make a lot of sense. So yeah, I think the country is responding, and I think it's responding for a number of reasons. Some of it is some of the things that we've seen captured on TV, and some of the coverage that's generated, and Black Lives Matter movement and other movements. And this scientific recognition that people mature later than we thought they did, which we kind of knew. I mean, if we could lock away every young man from the age of 16 to 23 or 24, we'd probably be in pretty good shape, right? Just put them in the closet.
As long as it's at an Ivy League school.
As long as it's at right, yeah. But think about it. I mean, we know that people mature, that they're not completely mature at the age of 18. We know that. We don't, as I said, we won't sell them liquor, and maybe we won't sell them, and we won't, we don't sell young people tobacco either, because we don't want them making those decisions. So all I'm saying is, primarily for nonviolent offenses, it makes sense to try to help them through the process of maturation, as opposed to putting in more roadblocks. I'm really encouraged that you want to talk about this as much as you do. I'm excited, because I think that having these discussions is really important to moving this along. Now, we made major progress last year in our first round of, well, wasn't our first round, but our first, where we titled it the way we did it. We really started this way back in 2011 when we decriminalized, not legalized, when we decriminalized marijuana, which is 8,000 fewer arrests per year in the state of Connecticut. If you want to talk about saving money and processing costs, that's a big one. But certainly last year with our major push, and we continue the process.
Well, and I just want to make the point out, clearly in a region like Greater New Haven, we see the absolute aftermath of the things you're talking about, because we cover the court system and we see what occurs, that we cover things that have occurred in New Haven, for instance, in the past 10 years, and the loss of life and recidivism that you've seen. So
yeah,
clearly it's important to us.
And the discrepancy around racial lines and poverty are really quite disturbing, and so I feel obligated to do something about it.
All right, on the budget, I guess,
Sure.
which is why I guess people are really here.
No, we're here for both reasons, for
Right.
these two big pushes.
Right. So the cuts that you're proposing now
Mhm.
were the kinds of things that you decried in 2011 and as late as 2014 would make the state of Connecticut unrecognizable. So how do you?
No, let's just stop there. I mean, now you're just repeating what somebody else wrote. That's not the case. In 2011, I was looking at a $7 billion biennium budget deficit, made up of a number of things, not the least of which is they'd spend every single dollar in the rainy day fund. They'd borrow $2 million on Wall Street, and they took ARRA money to the tune of $1 billion a year and displaced state payments. There's a gigantic difference between $600 million in adjustments to a budget and $7 billion of adjustment to a budget. There's a big difference. And so what we have isolated out is certain expenses that we're not making any reduction to. And things like ECS will remain constant. Now, if we had to cut $7 billion out of a biennium budget, not only would ECS not have remained constant in 2011 and 2012, it would have had to been reduced probably by $1 billion or half. So I mean, there's a world of difference, and I'm not angry, but this idea that this adjustment of some number of dollars is akin to taking $7 billion out of a biennium budget is just not the case.
Yeah, I would argue that the scale of the reductions that we've proposed.
Okay, wait, actually, and by the way, we've increased not only are we not in the 2011, but we actually increased ECS. We increased support for municipal government by over $1 billion. I mean, there's a world of difference between now and 2011 and 2012. Go ahead.
But I would just say that the scale of the cuts that we proposed are, I think, actually somewhat less than just the budget cut portion of the solution that we had in 2011. 2011, there were concessions, there were tax increases, and there were cuts to the budget. And the cuts that we're proposing now are, in fact, I think in dollar value over the next couple of years would be less than what we ended up adopting in 2011. So it's not really at that scale.
And then, quite frankly, I think that the other side of that is that in 2011 and 2012, Democrats, Republicans nationally were banking on a normal recovery to a post-World War II recession. It is now clear that that's not what we're experiencing and not likely to experience for a whole bunch of reasons, some of which I mentioned in the speech. And you experience every day.
What do you say to mayors and first selectmen who say, well, these cuts are going to cause us to have to raise property taxes, which puts the burden right back on?
We have shifted $1 billion in state expenses in support of local government over the last year, and last few years, and we are holding ECS constant, which is the largest flow of state dollars to local government. And yes, there'll be some minor adjustments in the remaining, but it is minor. And I will point out to you that in many of our municipalities, the property tax base is growing faster than our tax base.
But is that because of the how they're having to make up for stuff they're not getting from the state?
No, their actual tax base. I mean, the growth in grand lists in communities are actually, I mean, I've been watching it day by day in the Hartford Courant as they roll it out. And it's not universal, but there's pretty robust tax base growth. You know,
And the revenue sharing, I mean, they're getting more next year.
right, yeah.
Under our budget proposal, the total amount of cash payments from the state to local governments rises by close to $200 million because of the revenue sharing that was enacted last year.
Right. So actually, if you were to ask me, rephrase your question, what are we hearing from people? We're hearing, hey, thanks. You know, we get it. Everybody's got to give a little, and thanks for not taking it out of our hide, which other governors have done.
So those changes will go into effect. I mean, the sales tax, the revenue sharing proposal, that's what you're talking about, the 200 million more.
We did
That
not
won't be
propose
impacted?
any changes to that, and so that will result in a significant funding to towns. We reported it in our budget book. There's the sort of town-by-town listing of all the municipal aid and both the reimbursement for lost revenue from car taxes is one component of that, but then there's a whole significant other component, which is just new money to local governments. I didn't look up New Haven's, but I happened to have recently looked up Hartford's because the mayor called and asked, and they're getting $26 million in new aid. A little less than half of that, as I recall, was related to car tax, the reimbursement for the car tax cap, and the other half was new money, which is consequential in their budget. That's a shot in the arm that city needs. I think New Haven has a very similar result.
So overall, the actual money that's going to go to municipalities will be more
Yes.
than this year.
Plus, we're paying more for teachers' retirement this year. We're paying more for, we're expecting a larger school construction year than in the past based on the school construction list. So there are increases in other areas as well.
All right. I mean, I guess maybe the higher education budgets, I mean, departments will be spending less, I mean, for that area, right? I mean, if they're sharing,
but
they're going to pick up pensions and...
Well, they're being assigned the actual pension costs so that so the budget's actually transparent, so that people don't say we're only spending X on higher education. We're actually spending Y on higher education, and it's the kind of transparency that we think you deserve and changes behaviors. Everyone should know what the total cost is of the services they say that they're providing. and they should be accounted for. It certainly is true on our side, so it should be true in education as well.
Right, okay. Various social service programs, I mean, people are complaining already that they won't be able to, the nonprofits. We always say they're really stretched, and then this will make it worse and will impact things like the Second Chance Society, people coming out of prison and offering services for them. Is that?
We're
You don't agree
funding
with that?
we're funding our Second Chance Society programs. We have major housing initiatives, we have major employment initiatives, we have major educational initiatives, all of which are funded. I mean, everyone's going to complain. The great thing about being in the newspaper business, you can complain about taxes if he raises taxes, and you can complain about cuts in the budget if we make cuts in the budget. Everybody's got to cover the story. I get it, but there is a new economic reality. And we're trying to make sure that we budget in accordance with that reality. And I'm not hearing any economists say that they expect fast growth again in the near future. So the idea that we can continue to write out bigger and bigger checks without raising taxes is simply not true. And so we have to trim expenses somewhere. And we know that specifically we've lost about $560 million in support, so we got to bring our budget in alignment with that. Or we have to raise taxes. And I'm not calling for that. In fact, we won't raise taxes.
And I would point out on the human services side that we, just as we're tasking agencies to look at their core services and to focus their available resources on those, at the larger level, we identified what we think are the major core services of government, particularly in the human services area, and we protected those from cuts. So we did not cut the Medicaid program. We did not cut board and care for children in DCF. We did not cut community residential programs in DDS. We did not cut early childhood subsidies. We did not cut the major behavioral health programs that we have to provide behavioral health to people and substance abuse treatment to people who are income eligible. Those we see as the bread and butter of what we need to do to provide safety net services, and we protected those from the cuts that hit other areas of government.
On top of which, we have 41,000 more people this year covered by Medicaid, at least through enrollment, and a lot more people covered by private care through our exchange. So we continue the process of making sure people actually have a source of reimbursement for things that they formerly didn't have a source of reimbursement. We can't pay both through one program and then hold everyone steady on the other, because then it just simply costs that much more money. So we are providing a funding source as well.
So are you expecting a tough time labor issue-wise, given you're negotiating for contracts at the same time that people will be through attrition and potential layoffs?
Well, I think there is a reality that we can't sustain the current level of employment. We had already said that we needed to eliminate before July 1, 500 to 600 positions on top of the 1,000 positions that we had previously eliminated. But clearly, we're going to have to go further to remain within the budget. You guys in the newspaper business know a little bit about that.
So in an election year, what's your level of optimism or pessimism of how much of this you're going to be able to get accomplished?
I think we're going to get most of it accomplished, honestly. I think that there's a recognition, and I think what was important in the address and what's important in our messaging is that this is not going to get better. There's lines in the speech that, everybody used the same assumptions, Republicans, Democrats, OFA, on what growth would look like, and it hasn't. And it hasn't for a few years. And now with a GDP in the last quarter of 0.7% increase, at least preliminary, and expectations that GDP growth this quarter will be less than 1%, and that's nationally, we can't expect that we can raise taxes and be competitive, and so we have to make changes. That's what we're going to do.
So why were the projections continuously wrong, I guess? And is it corrected now? I mean, are you more certain about the figures going forward?
What we did routinely in our estimates was to estimate less growth than the services we were subscribing to, like Moody's. So listen, Pennsylvania has a $2.4 billion deficit. Massachusetts has a $635 million projected deficit. Louisiana's looking at a $2 billion deficit. I mean, the reality is that economists' expectations were that this recession, although appreciated that it was deeper, would see a normal post-World War II recession recovery. And the difference is that the Great Recession changed our economy. And technology is changing our economy as well. And then demographics are changing our economy as well. So I think there's mounting evidence that we're just not going to see that kind of recovery. I mean, actually, if you think about the Great Depression, if you take World War II out of it, that was a 20-year slow growth period of time as well. Maybe longer, maybe 25 or 30. So, I mean, I think what I'm trying to do is bring everyone's expectations in alignment with what the actual reality is likely to produce, as opposed to what we, collectively as a nation, as 50 states expected it to be.
Do you foresee some success on the lockbox issue
Yeah.
this time, getting everyone on board on the same?
I think so. Yeah, I feel good about that. I think that a bunch of the folks who didn't vote on it the last time are looking for an occasion to change that vote.
Spending cap too? Anything more?
Listen, that's a little bit beyond. I mean, I've said I'm the guy who proposed a spending cap language, or language that would have put the spending cap in place in 2011 or 12. Which year was it?
Both.
Both. All right. So, but there's a line in my speech that everyone's ideas should be put on the table, but at some point you got to bring your votes as well. If we want to have bipartisan government, then Republicans have to support something, and that's going to be important to the process. But I have made it so. I've previously proposed a spending cap. I said I support a spending cap. I'm ready.
It's interesting to note, adopting the rules for the spending cap does not require the governor to sign a bill or take action. It could be done by resolution, exclusively by the General Assembly. So there's no, the role here is we can propose and support, but we're not, the governor doesn't have a formal role.
And that's not new. I did it right out of the box.
We see it on the national level, and I think we see it in Connecticut, frustration people have with the inability of the parties to work together to actually solve issues. What can you do to make that happen better with the Republicans in this state?
Well, I mean, I think everybody's had it too easy. I think the public's, if you're Republican, you give the Republicans the benefit of the doubt. If you're Democrat, you give the Democrats the benefit of the doubt, and nobody holds people accountable. What I would hope for is a constituency that holds people accountable. So, Republicans need to hold Republicans accountable for their behaviors. Democrats need to hold Democrats accountable for behavior. I guess independents could be the arbiters of who's right. But again, I've produced a state government that has fewer employees than my predecessors. Has had spending increases at substantially less rate than my predecessors. And produced results the likes of which we haven't seen before. But I understand I'm not going to get credit for it because we're in a slow growth period of time and people are generally dissatisfied. I just want to bring, if you want to have a spending cap, then people have to come to the table. If you want to have a lockbox, people have to come to the table and support it. And I think people need to be held responsible for those actions by both parties and by their electorate.
So what are you doing to reach across the lines?
The speech, made reference to that. Everyone's invited to the table. Everyone's invited to bring their ideas, but you also have to be willing to compromise, and you have to be willing to support a final product. Otherwise, all you're doing is throwing bricks from the other side of the wall.
So the Republicans will be at the table.
That's what I said in my speech. Did you think I was going to change it between then and here?
Well, I mean, they seem to consistently say that they really don't have a voice.
They don't have. Listen, I think some of that's self-inflicted. Look up the last time they supported a budget under a Democrat or Republican governor.
Well, it's an election. So.
I'm not, just look at the history.
Half the years are election years. So if that prevents us from doing anything, we're really operating with one hand tied behind our backs.
I'm not being argumentative. I mean, I just, if you say you want a bipartisan process, then you have to bring more than your demands. And so I invite everybody to bring their ideas, but ultimately you need to be willing to compromise. Otherwise, we do have Washington.
Speaking of elections, can you talk to us a little bit about post Iowa, post New Hampshire? What's your plan in coming weeks or months in terms of what you'll do in the presidential race?
I support Hillary. I mean, let's
Right.
let's be very clear.
What you do.
I'll do anything I can to support that effort. So I'm an avowed supporter of Hillary Clinton. I hope she has a good March, and she won a close race in Iowa. She lost decisively last night. Having said that, she lost to a next-door neighbor of New Hampshire. No one in the New Hampshire primary who was from a neighboring state has ever finished less than second place, and that was Dean, who lost to another guy who was a neighbor of New Hampshire from Massachusetts. So, it's not unlike what's happened in the past. And I don't think Iowa or New Hampshire is representative of the National Democratic Party in other states. Having said that, she's got to go out and win this thing.
What are your specific plans? Do you have any specific plans for going, doing, on the table at this point?
No. But, I haven't been asked yet, so we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Any suggestions on what she should do for her campaign?
If I have suggestions of what she shall do, I guess I'll make them privately.
Why do you think Sanders' message has been resonating so strongly so far, or do you think it's just the aberration of these two states?
No, I don't think. Well, I don't think it's aberrational in the sense that there's in both parties a lot of discontent and unhappiness. I think some of it is reflective of a slow growth economy that people don't have expectations of, and haven't recognized the meaning of. And then, quite frankly, I go back to what you talked about. There is such a disconnect in Washington between the parties that drives a lot of discontent. So, having said that, I certainly don't want to see Donald Trump or Cruz or the Republicans in the presidency, and I believe that ultimately, Hillary is an electable Democrat who can govern well and has the experience necessary to do it. But listen, I'm a Democrat, and the Democrats have got to make their endorsement in the convention, and the Republicans have to have their endorsement. I think both of these things are going to go on for a long period of time. We've had Trump have a sizable win last night. He's going to be in it for the foreseeable future. You got Kasich, who got his 16%. You got other folks who are going to come out of it. I guess Christie's going home, so the field will further winnow down. But I imagine you're going to have 5, 6 serious candidates, at least in the next 2 rounds, and maybe it gets down to 4 candidates after that, and they're going to go on for a while. And quite clearly, the Democrats are going to go on for a while.
Do you see Trump's success as good or bad for Democrats?
I think it's bad for the country, so it's hard for me to be supportive. I also think Cruz's support is bad for the country. Those are worrisome. There are worrisome aspects in the success that both of them have demonstrated, I think, to our ideals.
What do you say to the people who say they just don't trust Hillary, either the email issue or just some general feeling about the Clintons?
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, that's clearly caught on. I mean, I think that whenever I tell people that Colin Powell and Secretary Rice kept their emails in exactly the same form that Hillary Clinton did, everyone's shocked. that doesn't get reported a lot, or that a review that looks at memos and years after, or emails, and years after determines that something that wasn't a secret when it was issued is now a secret is a very different process. But interestingly enough, they've identified that on both Colin Powell's and Rice's systems, even though they don't have access to anywhere near 35,000 emails on their systems. So I mean, I think there's a double standard being applied, and that's not likely to get reported and explained by me to 300 million Americans. So it's she's got a problem, but she's got to deal with it.
I'd like to switch gears and talk about the DMV a
Yeah.
little bit. You've introduced legislation with a goal of reducing wait times for residents
Yes.
in DMV centers. Can you talk a little bit about how privatizing some of those services may also generate some revenue for the state?
We're not seeking to privatize the DMV. The DMV has to be a state agency. On the other hand, what we're saying with the services that we're allowing one company to do, which is AAA, should be extended to more folks, so that folks who are customers of AAA or customers of other companies can be treated the same way that people who are customers of AAA are, and just broaden the availability. I mean, I'm a little older than you. I remember when I saw the first bank branch in a grocery store. But that's where America is. We should make these things as convenient as possible for folks to conduct the kind of business. And now we have an IT system that's being implemented that will allow that to happen much more frequently. We know about 40%, when we began this process, we knew that about 40% of the transactions that were taking place in the motor vehicle department would be able to be done technologically from anywhere. Including this very office. If you were to receive a notice that your registration was suspended for failure to do something, you could go on right now and take care of that, pay it with a credit card, and be reinstated instantly. What we have to do is get people used to that system. We have to meet them where they are. I think one thing that we probably should have done is to should have had kiosks in all the DMVs so that we could, something akin to when, again, a little older than you, I remember when the first ticket kiosks were put in airports, and they were there, and there were lots of people to explain how you do that. Now you walk up there, there's no one to explain it to you because people have gotten used to how you do it. And if you're not used to it, you go to the counter. But those lines are getting shorter all the time.
What does introducing things like those kiosks mean for DMV employees in the future? Is there employment status at the DMV in grim status?
I can't imagine that we're not going to have DMV employees in perpetuity. I think that there'll be fewer transactions that need to be done manually than can be done electronically. And exclusively manually as opposed to exclusively electronically. I mean, that's the world. I mean, you guys don't set type by hand anymore, do you? Okay. What did it mean to the guys who set the type?
They lost their jobs.
I think that there's a certain reality that the integrity of the motor vehicle department needs to be protected, and that there will always be employees to do that. But I don't think that that's a reason to not put the technologies in place that allow people to do transactions. I mean, people your age don't want to go to the motor vehicle department, and they're not. People my age will go to the motor vehicle department because they haven't figured out how to do it. But nobody your age is going there if they don't have to. And that's just a reality. I mean, and so what does that mean in the long run?
If you do have to go, you can go online and check what the wait times are and decide whether now's a good time to go, or maybe you should wait and do it later.
And you can schedule your driving exam online.
It's been reported that I think it was last week, Harper Kern had a story that there were some computer issues that may have listed residents' car registrations in different municipalities. How does the state plan to rectify that in helping out local tax assessors to
There is some of that happens every year, quite frankly. If somebody loads something incorrectly, then it comes out incorrectly, and those things are being worked through. But that's not an invention of this year. I mean, I was mayor of Stamford for 14 years, and I would bet you 5 of those years, there was some amount of discrepancy, but, you know, there's a way of saying it, which, you know, uses language that I won't use on the TV, but whatever goes in comes out, and it has to be corrected.
So in case of, you know, Greg's story about that, that will be corrected before people get the wrong bills?
Well, we can only correct that which we know, right? So whatever we know will be corrected. But I'm giving you real life experience. I was mayor for 14 years. On a routine basis, there is some number of information that has to be corrected. I just, you know, it happens. And that has to be worked through, and they're working through it.
No, and
I mean, one of the things was, you know, somebody put the wrong digit. So the 2005 cars were you know, listed as 2015. Well, it's clear what happened. You know, somebody put the wrong digit in, and so you have to go back and correct that for that. And that's a batch of work that was done by a particular individual at a particular time. It's not a, you know, it's stuff in, stuff out.
So this isn't related at all to the computer upgrade? From
No,
the
these
summer?
are human errors in putting the information in, as I understand it.
So the other component that the DMV actually helps collect property or personal taxes, car taxes, back down at the municipal level, because people are forced to do it before they can actually register their cars. So that's, I don't know, that's something you've already gotten pushback, I guess, from.
Yeah, but I
towns.
again, if you want to have shorter wait times, then you have to decide what are our core services. Our core services are to register a car, to give licenses, to register boats, to do those sorts of functions. Our core service was never that we were going to be somebody's bill collector. But every time somebody comes up to the counter and finds out that they have a bill or a ticket that's preventing them from being, then they have to go and they have to do a whole bunch of other things outside the office, and they have to come back to the office, and now we've doubled the time, if not tripled the time that they have to spend with us. And if you really want shorter wait times, then municipalities should collect their own bills. And we should get out of the business of being a bill collector, but that's one person's opinion. You know, municipalities have ways to collect those things, and there may even be better ways to electronically to do it. Maybe you don't wait for that to happen. Maybe you send out notices that something's going to be suspended or your registration will be suspended. But the idea that we're going to have somebody stand for an hour or spend an hour waiting to get to the counter, then discover something that they didn't know, that X, Y, or Z has happened, and then go away and then correct that and collect a whole bunch of papers for something. We're not talking about major things. We're talking about little tiny things.
When we were in Stamford, one of my responsibilities was overseeing the tax office, and that was a steady flow. There were dozens of people every day who showed up at the cashier's window in the tax department, irritated, frustrated with the fact that they were unable to register a car, they were giving their car to their kid and they couldn't transact it. They were buying a new car, they were doing something, and there was some situation with the taxes. Either they'd underpaid by 42 cents, or they had not paid on time, or there was a confusion in the DMV system or in a local tax system. It adds a lot of work at the local level and at the state level, and all to generate, incrementally, a few $1 million in addition, marginal car tax collections by local governments.
Yeah, statewide. And by the way, I proposed doing away with car taxes years ago. No one followed.
Speaking of cars, you have big transportation plans. Have you rethought your idea of widening I-95 from Greenwich to Stonington at all?
No, not at all.
Because people don't seem to think I think people are afraid of massive eminent domain and.
We own a lot of the right of way. There are some areas that we don't have sufficient right of way, but it's not a massive thing. And people are by and large extremely supportive of those those efforts. That doesn't mean that everyone's supportive of it, but I can assure you, people in the eastern portion of the state who have to put up with 2-lane highway that's carrying a road that is a system that has double and triple the number of cars that it was supposed to handle, understand how detrimental that can be to their economy. And likewise, people who are trying to get in and out of Fairfield County understand how detrimental that system is. So no, I haven't rethought it.
Do you have an idea of the cost of that?
Yeah, it's in, we gave round numbers. It's in the publications that we put out, round expectation numbers. Just like, there are numbers assigned for replacement of the multi-mixer, Mixmaster, excuse me. I'm thinking of my McDonald's working days. And replacement of I-84. I mean, no one thinks that we should let I-84 in Hartford fall down, but it is going to be inconvenient to rebuild it.
One of the arguments that I found most frustrating in some of the recent coverage about opposition to adding a lane, and I think it was specifically in reference to a new lane in Fairfield County, was that if you added new capacity to I-95 in Fairfield County, it wouldn't address congestion permanently because new development would use up that capacity, and so it was pointless to do that. And I thought, my God, we're all so frustrated with the pace of growth in the underlying economy here in the state, the pace of wage growth, the pace of job growth, the pace of revenue growth for everything that we do. The notion that we would make investments in transportation and that it's a bad thing that would prompt private investment, private development, new jobs, new people going back and forth, doing stuff and living their lives, that seems like a good thing, and that is the reason we should invest in more transportation infrastructure to foster development of our
or put it
lives.
another way, if we spend more money on that railroad, more people are going to use it. That's a terrible thing.
Cars are still going to be crowded. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded.
I mean, this plan calls for a 40% increase in bus traffic, including new routes. Disproportionately early investment in this plan will be in things like buses and rail, because we're further along and we control the entirety of the rights of way. You're never going to go from 4 tracks to 6 tracks in that system, because that doesn't exist. But I'd like to have a 4-track system actually operate as a 4-track system.
That doesn't require you to knock down buildings or...
Well, bridge replacement may. I mean, we have 4 bridges in that part of the state that need major work, and at least one of them has to be completely replaced. So, if it requires a building to be torn down, should we replace a 120-year-old bridge?
I guess so.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Yeah. I mean,
if
you think of New Jersey built a parallel highway system during the time that we did nothing. I mean, if you go down, if you take the turnpike down, now there's a bunch of lanes here and there's a bunch of lanes there going in the same direction, and we didn't do anything. And there's a reason that our roads, that we're the most congested state in the region, because we didn't do any of the things that other people did. I remember when I tell people this, I remember in 1973, when I went away to college, and everyone talked about the game changer that 128 was around the Boston area, so that you could connect the entirety of the Boston community in a big circle. We never did any of that. We just ignored it. I mean, what my predecessors did doesn't deserve an award. It deserves being corrected.
Speaking of things that cost the state money, can you...
And by the way, let me just do one thing. And the cost is $5 billion a year. Not doing anything is costing us $5 billion a year.
Can you talk about whether you think, and this might be better addressed to you, the claims commissioner system in Connecticut works well, or does it need to be revised?
We're looking at that. I think what's important is that we don't put people in jail. I mean, the most recent discussion is largely about, been driven by, should we wrongly incarcerate people? And if you come out of incarceration and you were wrongly convicted, should you be compensated for it? Beyond that, I think the system needs some general modernization as well. But the most recent discussion is around that issue, it's an evolution. There was no ability to sue sovereign governments, and then we created a situation and recognized that there should be situations in which you can sue, and we established a system. I didn't, but long ago it was established. I think it's deserving of a review at this point.
Your policy on quarantines, put into place during the Ebola crisis, do you have any intention of modifying that? There's a lawsuit now that is critical that they thought it was an overreaching, essentially.
I think that we bring things into compliance on a regular basis. We don't want people spreading disease, and certainly something as deadly as Ebola, which killed 11,000 people in a relatively short period of time, including infecting people who traveled to the area and brought Ebola back to the United States. So, having said that, we should be constantly reviewing our policies and procedures. We're going to have to talk about Zika in a couple of days here in the state of Connecticut, and have a major discussion about that issue. So what you do is you make decisions based on what you know, and when you can classify risk, you try to prevent that risk from spreading.
Right, I guess these particular individuals had no sign of the disease. Instead of just being monitored, they were actually quarantined, and that was their issue. That was unconstitutional.
Not everyone who traveled to the area was quarantined. There were specific indicators that led some people to be quarantined and others not to be quarantined. And you do that in conformance with what you know about a disease, a communicable disease, at the time you have to make those decisions.
Okay.
The reality is no one, because governments acted, I think, in a responsible way in the United States, the disease didn't take hold, and that's a good thing.
What are you looking at with Zika?
I think that we know what kinds of mosquitoes are most likely to transmit it, so I think there are things that we're going to have to do to protect ourselves in Connecticut with respect to that. And I have a bunch of people working on that issue and how we can best protect our citizenry with some aggressive steps that we should take to lessen the number of mosquitoes in our jurisdiction.
What kind of steps?
Well, you got to stay tuned.
Wait.
I have people working on it, and I think we'll be speaking to the issue very shortly. This is a relatively recently discussed development over the last few weeks. Health department and other departments are working on the issue as we speak, and we'll roll out
Aren't
some
those
things.
mosquitoes, from what I've read, because we paid pretty close attention to it, and we have the ag station right here in New Haven, those are southern mosquitoes. They're not,
Not native to
so
Connecticut.
maybe you know something we don't know about them coming here.
So we'll be discussing this in the very near future. The reality is we're going to have, one way or the other, we have lots of different types of mosquitoes in the United States, and we're going to have travelers who bring back the disease and already have brought back the disease or exposure. So we have to have a real conversation about how we protect ourselves against the spread of what is, particularly to pregnant women, a very dangerous, exposure.
They're quarantining mosquitoes.
If we could quarantine mosquitoes, wouldn't you want to?
Circling back on the economy a little bit, are there any lessons that the state can take from what happened with GE?
Well, I think that, I think the GE issue is a lot more complex than people make it out to be. GE in their own announcement, although you and I, they only said something in Connecticut 6 months before they made the decision in their announcement. They had actually said that they've been at work on it for 3 years. Having said that, I think what we need to do on a broader basis is do things like address our long-term obligations in state government. There's a significant portion of my speech that's devoted to those long-term obligations and how they can be brought into alignment with current economic reality. There is a new economic reality, and I think the failure of the state government to do that could be very dangerous for the state. So, a good portion of the speech was devoted to that and other subjects in alignment with that. So, are there lessons to be learned? Sure, I think that we need to use our educational system more like other states have, but we've been underway in doing that for the last 5 years. I think we have to have more vibrant cities. That's something we've been working on pretty steadily in Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, and Waterbury, certainly all the years that I've been governor, and for a total of 20 years in Stamford. I mean, I think there are lessons to be learned about demographics, about how people want to live, the lifestyles they want to live. For much of your life and my life, United States, Americans were rejecting cities. Now they want to go back to cities, in part because some of the investments that we've made in those cities. I think Boston is a far more attractive place because billions of dollars were spent handling their transportation issues. So I think there are lots of lessons that we have to learn. And we got to go soon. Okay, you see, they gave me the signal. Anything else?
Anybody else? All good?
Yeah, good. Thanks.
All right.
Good.
Thank you.
Hopefully we've shared some information.
Mary, sent you those two,
Everything's okay.
yeah,